All right. Well, good morning, good evening, afternoon, depending on what part of the globe you're on and what time zone you are in. We're going to get started today with today's reading, American Crusade by Andrew Seidel. This was the book I promised to start reading last week. And away we go. The book as promised. American Crusade. Let's see if we can turn that around. I hate when it mirrors my book. There we go. American Crusade. How the Supreme Court is weaponizing religious freedom. A very important book. Now, the last book we read was The Founding Myth. This was a great book. I love this book. Why Christian Nationalism is Un-American by Andrew L. Seidel. You can follow him here on TikTok. You can order his book on Amazon. All right. Without further ado, let's get busy. All right. Starting. Let's do this. Let's go ahead and read the introduction. Introduction, Jesus Take the Wheel. Sandra Day O'Connor said, those who would renegotiate the boundaries between church and state must therefore answer a difficult question. Why would we trade a system that has served us so well for one that has served others so poorly? And truer words could not have been spoken. I am getting sick and tired of that bleed through. Guess we'll have to get closer to the camera. Okay. And away we go. She let go and let God take the wheel. That's what she told the police. Her 11-year-old daughter was riding shotgun in her teal Ford Taurus. Let's see. Trials and tribulations had plagued. Trials and tribulations had plagued her like Job, and she believed it was time to test her faith in God. So she let her fear go and went for it. She blew through a red light at 120 miles per hour, sliced the front end off of another car, careened backward off the road, toppled power lines, and ended up in a house. She reportedly told police she did the right thing. After all, nobody was hurt. This wasn't the first time someone let Jesus take the wheel, nor was it the last. It's disturbingly common. A Pennsylvania woman drove around for hours expecting a calling from God. When the call finally came, she obeyed it and drove into oncoming traffic on Route 93. The crash sent 2 people to the hospital, but, quote, God took care of her by not letting her get injured, she told police. She had no remorse. Why would she? She was carrying out God's will. A Tennessee man flipped a truck over 5 times when Jesus was calling him, and he advised him to let go of the wheel. Which he did. He also fled the scene, or as he put it, left because he was being called to bow before someone. Oh, this gets crazier and crazier. One woman deliberately rear-ended a line of cars at nearly 100 miles per hour, causing a 5-car pileup involving 18 people and sending 2 to the hospital. When the police asked her why, she responded that God told her to, and she does whatever God tells her to. A Florida man drove his Ferrari off a pier into 30 feet of water because Jesus made me the smartest man on earth, and it's so hard to have this much responsibility, according to the police report. Some were fined, some lost their license, some were charged with crimes including endangering a child, 12 counts of attempted murder. Good, we might think. Let's hope that they get some counseling too. Letting Jesus drive is reckless behavior that kills or injures others. It risks killing and injuring others and destroys property. But hang on, what about their religious freedom? In a day where millions of Americans believe that religious freedom includes the right to risk the health and safety of others by worshiping in huge crowds without masks or vaccines during a pandemic, why is religious freedom not part of the news stories about Jesus taking the wheel? Where are the overfunded Christian legal outfits clamoring to vindicate the rights of these oppressed Christians who can't even drive on public roads the way their God intended? They'll take the cases of businesses that want to violate civil rights laws and refuse LGBTQ customers all the way up to the Supreme Court, but not defend these prophets hearing directly from God. Why isn't this the culture war issue of our times? Because it's absurd. And we understand that at a visceral level, the religious claim that Jesus will take the wheel is deadly, and the legal claim is ridiculous. There are laws against speeding, running red lights, and endangering children. If the driver doesn't want to comply with the traffic laws, she doesn't get to drive. She loses her license. The same is true even if one's God is a bit of a backseat driver. Religious freedom isn't a license to drive recklessly. This scenario is easy. But legally, it's the same as the cases we'll explore in this book, such as Hobby Lobby case or the gay wedding cake case, or churches claiming that the blood of Jesus will prevent the spread of a lethal pandemic. Sound familiar, anybody? Hmm? Hmm. So why is it ridiculous to claim the religious freedom to justify careening through a red light at 120 miles per hour with your kid, but not to recklessly spread a lethal virus? That is a good question. Along the religious freedom spectrum, there are plenty of cases that seem easy, including the other direction. In 1999, one federal court decided that 2 Muslim cops in Newark could grow their beards, as their sect of Islam required, even though the department regulations said no. The reg sought to professional and they sought a professional and dignified image to the public, but seemed a bit arbitrary given the mustachioed chief. Here, too, the result is obvious. Let them grow a beard. Who cares? Nobody else is affected. Nobody's rights are threatened by the religious exercise. But a lot has changed since 1999. And even these seemingly innocent and easy cases are used to further a crusade against true religious liberty. A book of Isaiah tells of a time when people shall beat their swords into plowshares, repurposing weapons of war into implements of production, security, and stability is a lovely sentiment. But American Christians are proving the prophecy false. They're beating plowshares into swords. In particular, they're beating religious freedom into a sword, turning a hollowed tool that protected conscience from government overreach, more of a shield than a farm implement, into a weapon. A network of faithful, well funded activists uh, groups are attempting to redefine and weaponize religious liberty. I'll call them crusaders throughout this book. The crusaders are perverting this constitutional protection to reshape it into a weapon to impose their religion on others. The weapon is exclusive. You may wield it if you're of the right religion, if you're a Christian, or really if you're the right kind of a conservative Christian. Successfully forging this weapon will codify the receding privilege of its dwindling minority in the face of equality. But to do that, they have to redefine what religious freedom means to the average American, and the judges have to agree to redraft a long-standing constitutional right. Quite a few are ready to do so. Our Supreme Court is on the verge of consummating this contradictory notion of religious liberty and grafting it onto our Constitution. Unless we stop it and undo the damage done, the First Amendment will mean supremacy for conservative Christians and sanction for bigotry in the name of Jesus. Our Constitution gives to bigotry no sanction, wrote George Washington in a famous letter to the Toro Synagogue in Newport, Rhode Island. Our first president toured the country in 1790 to shore up support for the new national government, unite the new country, and rally support for the constitutional amendments that would become the Bill of Rights, including the First Amendment. He visited the synagogue and wrote the congregation a letter condemning the idea that the government would simply tolerate religious minorities. Toleration claims power but does not exercise it. Thomas Paine put it like this a year later: toleration is not the opposite of intolerance, but it is the counterfeit of it. Both are despotisms. The one assumes itself the right of withholding liberty of conscience and the other of granting it. In her remarkable book, Caste, Isabel Wilkerson tells us it is not enough to be tolerant. You tolerate mosquitoes in the summer, a rattle in an engine, the gray slush that collects on the sidewalk in the winter. You tolerate what you would rather not have to deal with and wish would go away. It is no honor to be tolerated. Instead of toleration, Washington focused on individual rights, which the Constitution amendments set out to protect. The citizens of the United States of America have a right to applaud themselves for having given to mankind examples of an enlarged and liberal policy, a policy worthy of imitation. All possess alike liberty of conscience and immunities of citizenship. It is now no more that toleration is spoken of, as if it was the indulgence of one class of people, that another enjoyed the exercise of their inherent natural rights. The Crusaders, however, want to return to tolerance. They want to go back to a time before the Constitution when Christians were in charge of everything, unfettered by legal restraints, and when religious minorities and non-believers existed on sufferance. The famous line from Washington's letter rejects this. Happily, the government of the United States gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance. This understanding of religious freedom, which requires only that they who live under its protection should demean themselves as good citizens. As Washington phrased it, it is antithetical to claim that religious freedom allows one person to violate the rights of others. This version of religious freedom gives bigotry a sanction. Can a business refuse to serve a gay couple in violation of civil rights laws because the owner is a conservative Christian? Can the government refuse to issue lawful license or documents to a gay couple because the issuing official is born again? Can businesses and officials refuse to serve Black Americans because their personal God says so? Do Christian parents have a right to use the government taxing power to fund their children's Christian schools? Can they do this even though our taxes already pay for an entire school system that's open to all? Can a city council ban certain religious practices in an effort to drive a church out of town? Can business owners thwart laws that grant employees healthcare rights because of what the owner's holy book supposedly dictates? Can government officials use state power and resources to spread Islam? What about Christianity? What about erecting and maintaining a 40-foot tall Christian cross on government property? Can believers ignore the rules that protect public health? The answer to each of these questions posed in real cases should be no. Legal questions of religious freedom are not always simple. They can be complicated and more often emotionally fraught. Eventually, they involve children. But in their push to weaponize religious liberty, the Crusaders have misled and confounded many Americans about where we draw the legal lines for this founding American principle. While religious freedom cases may not raise simple questions, they're not very hard either. Who are the Crusaders? The people and groups fighting to weaponize religious freedom are not normally affiliated under a single name or banner other than the Christian flag, but theirs is a holy war, the battle to privilege the few who believe in the correct version of the correct God, waged at the expense of those who do not. They're not conquering land, but in a war of conquest. At the most basic level, they're seeking privilege to codify supremacy. The Crusaders' legal challenges are superficially about Christian crosses, veterans or playgrounds, or private school vouchers, or bakeries and gay weddings, but really they're about religious privilege, often literally about the privileging religion over non-religion, Christianity over other religions, and the right kind of conservative Christian over other Christians. The Crusader wants to elevate Christian beliefs above the law and exempt Christians from the law while disfavoring non-religious and non-Christian citizens who are required to follow the law. Privilege and supremacy. Religious freedom could be their weapon to reclaim and entrench their dominant caste status. They undo equality in the name of religious freedom. We'll meet various Crusader groups as we discuss the cases and their commonality. Okay, let's turn that down. Okay. Thank you for that goal. I appreciate it. Let's see if we can set a new one. Let's see. We'll meet various Crusader groups as we discuss the cases, but there are commonalities. Let's try it again. Usually the group was started by a white Christian man, often one with early racist leanings and a professed homophobia. Let's see. Quite a few groups, including the Alliance Defending Freedom, the Family Research Council, and the First Liberty Institute, have early ties to James Dobson. An anti-gay white Christian with early racist and eugenics leanings. Some were started with Koch brothers seed money. Cash infusion from the Davos Empire are typical. The network is shadowy, complex and vast, too much to fully cover in this book. Jane Mayer from Dark Money, Catherine Stewart, The Power Worshippers, and Jeff Charlotte from The Family. An excellent resource to get curious started. But a taste of this small, wealthy, and opaque network is important because it has captured the Supreme Court. One Catholic couple, Anne and Neil Corkery, created the Wellspring Committee to funnel hundreds of millions into the fight for conservative Christian judges. Anne is a self-professed member of Opus Dei, an uber conservative wing of the Catholic Church that practices self-flagellation. Using millions from the Koch brothers and their friends, the couple funded this dark money conduit, effectively laundering billionaire donations so no one would have to be accountable. Wellspring, one of many such dark money groups, partially funded two of the biggest players fighting to take over the court, the Judicial Crisis Network and the Federalist Society. Leonard Leo runs both. Leo is universally recognized as the man who orchestrated the hostile takeover of the Supreme Court. A former employee described Leo's mission. He figured out 20 years ago that conservatives had lost the culture war. Abortion, gay rights, contraception. Conservatives didn't have a chance if public opinion prevailed. So they needed to stack the courts. The Judicial Crisis Network spent tens of millions to confirm Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett, spreading misinformation about the courts and nominees. Carrie Severino is listed as the sole employee on the JCN website, not because it's small, but because it's a shell and Leo runs the show. JCN is Leonard Leo's PR organization, nothing more, nothing less. Severino runs JCN for Leo, while her husband Roger worked in the Trump administration as director in Health and Human Services. Tasked with enforcing anti-discrimination laws at HHS, Roger, who's virulently anti-LGBTQ, instead created a new conscious and religious freedom division with an eye towards allowing Christians to deny patients access to health care by claiming religious freedom. Roger described the couple as serious Catholics. He previously worked for two crusaders, the Becket Fund for Religious Liberty and the Heritage Foundation, where he ran the Davis Center for Religion and Civil Society. Yes, that Davis. Carrie clerked for Clarence Thomas, whose wife Jeannie has deep ties with the Crusaders network, including shadowy counsel for national policy. The Heritage Foundation and many others included those litigating cases before her husband. One of JCN's original founders is also a former Thomas clerk. She wrote about Thomas clerks that she and her friends had been praying our knees off that January 6th would see light and truth being shed on what we believe in our hearts was likely a stolen election, and that, quote, Trump would be determined to be the legitimate winner, unquote. And that on the day she marched and prayed and shared another important message, Jesus saves. John Eastman, the legal architect of the failed January 6th insurrection, who also tried to instigate a new wave of birtherism against Kamala Harris, is another former Thomas clerk. He weighed in on the listserv against the election result, too. The network is highly religious, incestuous, and nepotistic. Leo began his takeover of the Supreme Court while at the Federalist Society and drove hard to get Roberts and then Alito installed, the rocks on which he would build his conservative supermajority. Leo and his networks blocked Merrick Garland's nomination for nearly a year with an anonymous $17 million donation to JCN, half of which was spent blocking Garland. Leo also wrote the list of potential Supreme Court nominees that Trump made public and from which Trump chose Gorsuch, then Kavanaugh, then Barrett. The Washington Post estimated that Leo raised $250 million for this judicial mission and his network between 2014 and 2017. Leo is a conservative Catholic and a member of the Knights of Malta, a Catholic order that traces its origins back to the Knights Hospitaller and the First Crusade, or Hospitaller. He's quite literally a crusader. The Catholicism and reach of Leo's shadowy kingdom seem ripped from the pages of a Dan Brown novel, as one journalist put it. His faith is paramount to him, and as former media director, when Leo travels, his staff finds the closest Catholic church so that Leo, like Clarence Thomas, can attend daily mass. In 2007, George W. Bush appointed Leo as chairman of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, where he has promptly sued for employment discrimination for terminating a Muslim, and with other employees resigning in protest. Leo was also involved in a group organized by Clarence Thomas's wife that opposed the Ground Zero Mosque. He even had his own highly rated law school, the acronymically challenged and Antonin Scalia School of Law, ASSOL. Wow, acronym is not your forte. Yes, the Crusaders are Christians. Some readers will already have reflexive countered some points with various variations on the common theme. They're not real Christians. True Christians don't X, Y, and Z. These people are fake Christians. This argument is part of the problem. Inevitably, such fundamentalism will arise with the complex cultural systems that religions represent. Fundamentalism cannot be stamped out, and it is no use treating it as not really religious, explains Chrissy Stroop in an essay on the subject. These Christians justify their beliefs with their Bible, sermons, and church. Often, the messages they receive have a longer history, more biblical support than the newer, more exclusive strains of Christianity. The fake Christian counter typically pops up when people feel personally attacked because they identify as a Christian or because they equate Christian with good person. The myth that to be a Christian is to be a good person, and vice versa, is persistent and problematic. Morality is independent of religion, and we must divorce these two concepts. Good people are good people. Christians are Christians, and the two are not synonymous. And the more we link them, the more we encourage people to adopt the easy label rather than evaluate the behavior that makes a good person. The conflation of the two is one reason we've been so blind to this ongoing crusade. Put simply, Christians can be bigots, authoritarians, bad people. Most aren't. Many Christians fight for true religious freedom, including pro-choice pastors, nuns saving the environment, the Unitarian minister arrested for giving food and water to immigrants coming across the southern border. Their religious freedom cases tend to be clearer and cleaner and involve helping others, not harming them. It's crucial for kind, empathetic, quality-minded Christians to stand up and fight against this crusade. Not just the theological label pretending that the Crusaders are not Christians doesn't solve the problem. It makes it insoluble. Hey, Udhef, how you doing? He says SCOTUS shouldn't have given Trump absolute immunity if they wanted him to follow their orders. Yeah, I think that's a fig leaf, though, for them. The Koch brothers actually pronounce Koch brothers. Can I just call them Koch brothers? Do I have to call them Koch? That's okay. Okay, thank you for keeping up on the audio, Sweet Pea. Awesome. Yeah, the Koch brothers. Yeah, we'll just call them Koch brothers. The weapon is a silver bullet. There will never be enough privilege and power to satisfy the Crusaders, even if the Crusaders successfully weaponize religious freedom. That's only the beginning. The power of this particular weapon is that it is a silver bullet. It can trump any law or rule or norm. Religion is a permission structure that grants people the moral justification for any action, however harmful. A weaponized religious freedom is the legal justification for these harmful acts. Once religious freedom is weaponized, they'll carry it into every other legal fight. Public health measures and civil rights laws are two areas where religious freedom trumping good citizens was once unthinkable, but is quickly becoming the norm. See chapters 5, 11, and 16. And the license to harm others won't end with discriminating against LGBTQ citizens. Crusaders will use it to reestablish white supremacy, something that was made hauntingly clear in oral arguments at the Supreme Court. They'll also bring religious freedom into unexpected arenas, like the fight for voting rights. Even the absurd idea that people have a religious freedom right to violate traffic laws is conceivable. The Mississippi House passed the Jesus Take the Wheel Act in 2015, a law that would have allowed church-owned vehicles to transport busloads of people without the appropriate commercial license. Because why do you need a license to maneuver a 40-foot-long coach bus when Jesus is driving? The bill died, but the crusade has gained ground. The entire point of weaponized religious freedom is that it is limitless. The Crusaders are reformulating our co-equal, co-extensive human rights into a hierarchy of rights. Some rights will be placed above others as more worthy of legal protection, while one right above them all, religious freedom. By placing atop the hierarchy of rights the free exercise rights of conservative Christians, a demographic that is shrinking every day, they can act on those beliefs no matter what the cost to society, our secular government, or the rights of others. This is easy to spot in the wild. One blatant example is Mississippi's religious freedom law, a law drafted by Crusaders. Governor Bryant signed the Protecting Freedom of Conscience from Government Discrimination Act in April 2016, the state's third religious freedom law in as many years. The law doesn't defend freedom of conscience from government overreach. It singles out specific conservative Christian beliefs about sex for special legal recognition. The second section of the bill lists all the religious beliefs or moral convictions protected by this act, and it's in entirety, and it reads, marriage is or should be recognized as the union of one man and one woman. Sexual relations are properly reserved to such a marriage, and male or female refer to an individual's immutable biological sex as objectively determined by anatomy and genetics at the time of birth. They haven't figured out that intersex people actually exist. And they haven't figured out that, intersex, people born with both genitals. What are you going to do about that? Or what about women who have male chromosomes at birth? These people are just beyond ignorant and stupid. The state of Mississippi examined the vast expanse of available theology and singled out 3 precepts from conservative Christianity for special protection. Never mind science, biology, or the beautiful complexities of human sexuality, this doesn't protect religious freedom. It codifies conservative Christian doctrine in the name of religious freedom. Not only does the Mississippi law prefer these beliefs to all others, it privileges actions inspired by the beliefs. Business owners, organizations, and even government officials who hold these special beliefs may deny marriage licensing, housing, foster care, and adoption placement, and marriage-related goods or services like photography, baking, and floral arrangements to anyone who has transgressed the sexual dictates of their God. It's easy to imagine what the reaction would have been if Islam or Hindu or Jewish beliefs were codified like this. Millions would suddenly muster to defend the wall of separation between state and church and argue that the government has no power to legally recognize religious tenets. When blocking the law, the lower court explained that it violated the separation of state and church, as well as anti-discrimination principles. The law violates both the guarantee of religious neutrality and the promise of equal protection of the law. And yes, the law preferred conservative Christian beliefs. The state has put its thumb on the scale to favor some religious beliefs over others. The well-written decision surveys American law dating back to the colonial period, but in the end, the decision was simple. The law was unconstitutional because it established an official preference for certain religious beliefs over others. That is what a weaponized religious freedom does. The lower federal court's analysis was spot on. The law is unconstitutional, but 3 Republican judges on the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, 2 appointed by George W. Bush, 1 by Reagan, overruled the lower court. Not on the merits, but on a jurisdictional issue that rendered the challenge impotent. The law is still on the books today. The bill was not the brainchild of any elected representative of the people of Mississippi. It was written, promoted, and shepherded through the legislature by a crusader we'll hear more about, the Alliance Defending Freedom. Formerly, the Alliance Defense Fund, ADF, has wormed its wealthy tentacles into every aspect of the crusade, not just here in the States, but also abroad. Emails revealed ADF's widespread involvement with the Mississippi law, including handling legal challenges, drafting legislative language, and producing talking points and signing statements. This law privileges conservative Christianity because that's ADF's goal. The law is a stark warning that the crusader might look like what it might look like if successful. A hierarchy of rights and a hierarchy of religions. The weaponized version of religious freedom replaces our egalitarian understanding of the concept with conservative Christian privilege. That right is the top of a pyramid. That super right then trumps other rights and others' rights. Religious freedom becomes a weapon, a shield beaten into a sword. The Crusaders were explicit about their hierarchy. Mike Pompeo is a conservative Christian who yearns for the end times and said that politics is a never-ending struggle until the rapture. As Trump's Secretary of State, he slapped together the Commission of Unalienable Rights specifically to argue for this hierarchy. That commission produced a report based in part on biblical teachings to argue that foremost among the unalienable rights that government is established to secure, from the founder's point of view, are property rights and religious liberty. Religious freedom and property are raised up foremost, with other rights framed as lesser, ad hoc rights, while still others, abortion, same-sex marriage, were downgraded as social and political controversies. None of this is true, as hundreds of experts explained to Pompeo's commission repeatedly. It is a fundamental tenet of human rights that all rights are universal and equal. But the Crusaders' version of human rights is Christianity over humanity. But why the crusade? It's largely a backlash against equality realized. Christianity was once able to discriminate on the basis of race. Now that's largely unthinkable. Christianity was once able to legally subjugate half the population. Christianity was once able to discriminate against LGBTQ people, but now isn't. As more people realize rights due to them by virtue of being human, the sphere of religious imposition shrinks. The crusade seeks to reclaim this lost ground. Obamacare expanded equality by recognizing the reproductive rights of American women. Hobby Lobby conservative white Christian owners fought against the expansion of rights under the guise of religious freedom. The Obergefell decision expanded equality by recognizing the rights of LGBTQ citizens to marry. Masterpiece Cake Shop's conservative white Christian owner and a host of other businesses fought that expansion, claiming religious freedom. Brown versus the Board of Education expanded equality by recognizing the rights of Black Americans to equal access to public education. In the name of religious freedom, Christians pushed for school choice vouchers and segregation academies. White Christian Americans facing equality act like martyrs, suffering for their faith. They feel that these expansions violate their rights, but parity is not oppression. Equality, even when it means the erosion of privilege, is not discrimination. If you're given 100 that was stolen from someone else and the law demands that you give it back, you're not being robbed. Rather, justice has been achieved. To you, it may feel unjust to be forced to give up the money, especially if the law has not cared about the victim in the past, or worse, if the law had previously said that the victim wasn't human. It may feel doubly unfair if the law had, until recently, agreed with your religion. Slave mongers stole enslaved people's lives and complained about the unfairness of losing their property when the United States belatedly abolished slavery and recognized humans as humans. The only injustice would have been the continual refusal to do the latter. To fight against equality is to fight for supremacy. Equality is a threat to Christianity as the dominant caste. Religious freedom is their answer. If we put all this together, the silver bullet, the hierarchy of rights, the fight against equality for supremacy, the crusade begins to look like a quest to find a holy grail that will reverse inexorable demographic trends. White Christian American status as the dominant group is threatened, and when the dominant group or caste in society feels threatened or left behind by circumstances, it reacts or overreacts by seeking a way to retain the status. Some political scientists credit dominant group status threat for Trump's 2016 electoral victory. Fearful white Christians aligned with the person claiming he'd bring back America they knew, the America where they dominated all others. Diana Mutz, a leading proponent of this theory, argues that the 2016 election was an effort by members of an already dominant group to assure their continued dominance, and by those in an already powerful and wealthy country to assure its continued dominance. In caste, Wilkerson posits that the source of their discontent is the end of an illusion, an awakening of the holes in the article of faith, that an inherited unspoken superiority, a natural deservedness over subordinated castes, would assure their place in the hierarchy. They had relied on this illusion, perhaps beyond the realm of consciousness, and perhaps needed it more than any other group in a forbiddingly competitive society. The disillusion strikes at their identity, and they chose to fight reality rather than diminish their self-image. Fox News' success comes partly because the hosts tap into this fear, so that white Christians sitting comfortably on the couch, safe at home, feel threatened. Other researchers are finding evidence for the preservation of dominance as well, and it ties closely to Christian nationalism, the subject of my first book. In 2021, survey found that simply mentioning the fast-changing religious demographics in America elicited a threat response and triggered defensive political stances among Christians. Simply acknowledging shifting demographics created a feeling that their religious freedom was threatened and pushed them toward Christian nationalism and Donald Trump. They conflate demographic loss with a threat to their freedom, which suggests that they fundamentally misunderstood religious liberty as privilege, that they believed freedom means enjoying the trappings of their dominant status. Studies agree that religious freedom means something very different to white American Christians than it does to other Americans. One 2020 election study showed that voters who believed religious freedom was the most important issue and chose their 2020 presidential candidate accordingly also thought that the federal government should declare America a Christian nation. These voters ranked religious freedom above the economy and abortion, and they want a Christian nation. As Sam Perry, one of the researchers, explained, it's almost as if religious freedom is code for Christian freedom. The government aligning with one religion is the death of religious freedom. They see it as the definition of religious freedom. This is the essence of Christian nationalism and the antithesis of true religious freedom. The Crusade is a quest to remake a protection into a weapon for maintaining a dominant group status in the face of waning demographic power. This isn't a novel observation. This legal offensive to elevate Christian religious liberty over other civic goals is coming even as the share of Americans who ascribe to no religious faith is steadily rising. And as white Christians have fallen to a minority share of the population, wrote Ronald Brownstein in The Atlantic, religious freedom is a weapon for white Christian Americans to plant their crosses on public land, declaring it theirs, not ours. For white Christian Americans to discriminate against lesser groups, lesser castes. For white Christian Americans to remove their children from public school systems, integrated and diverse, and put them in private religious schools at taxpayer expense, forcing taxpayers to maintain two educational systems, one for everyone and the other for a waning dominant caste. For white Christian Americans to deny bodily autonomy and reproductive freedom to people deemed subservient by their holy book. For white Christian Americans to opt out of public health measures meant to protect everyone in a pandemic. Most importantly, for this dominant caste to declare unconstitutional any failure to recognize any of these privileges, to declare that equality is hostility. The expansion of equality and withering religious and racial hegemony is the contested territory in many religious freedom cases. This means that Christian privilege should be losing, not winning more often. In reality, we're not expanding rights or giving new rights. We are recognizing rights that have always existed under the law, but were never enforced. We are affirming the humanity of our brothers and sisters and admitting that we've been wrong. As we realize the aspirational values implicit in we, the people, equal justice under the law, all are created equal, and other founding maxims as we recognize that humans are humans and worthy of rights. White Christian America is dying a slow demographic death and rebelling. They are raging against the dying of their privilege. Author's note, jargon be damned. This book is not meant to be comprehensive. It's a warning that the First Amendment is being destroyed. In its place, crusaders are forging a weapon to ensure their supremacy. This book will tell the real stories behind recent religious freedom cases to explain true religious freedom. Sometimes we legal professionals get buried under legalese, procedure, judicial philosophies, and precedents. Sometimes we hide behind them. Often it's better just to cut through all that distraction and look at the core of a case or dispute. To go back to basics. I try to do that in these pages, and I write for everyone, avoiding legal jargon, case names, and even legal tests, compelling government interest, strict scrutiny, rational basis review. These tests can be manipulated by judges in a way that makes the search for intellectual or doctrinal consistency frustrating or futile. Focusing on the legal tests unnecessarily removes these cases from public understanding and also buys the legitimacy of the inquiry. Focusing on court-created tests rather than underlying principles also buys into the myth of a court that a Chief Justice John Roberts himself preached at his 2005 confirmation hearing has one job: to call balls and strikes. Roberts and other judges don't do that. On politically charged and cultural war issues, they're often manipulating the law and even the facts to reach a desired outcome. So we'll shun these myths and jargon in favor of foundational principles. These pages may not comfort with the language other courts or legal academy prefers, but that has the benefit of consistency, longevity, and I hope clarity. This also means that we won't always be repeating the facts as stated by the Supreme Court, which often reverse engineers decisions by emphasizing or ignoring certain facts and even changing facts to fit their opinion. We'll dig deeper. I've interviewed the people involved in these cases and scored archives and other records. We treat courts as arbiters of truth and justice, but they often fall very short of that. I remember the indignation and shock I felt when I first experienced the Supreme Court altering material facts in a case. My friends at Americans United for Separation of Church and State, whom I now have the pleasure of working alongside, I challenged the Christian prayers at city council meetings in the town of Greece, New York. Christian clergy delivered every single prayer for a decade. I have been asked to write as a friend of the court an amicus brief when the case got to the Supreme Court. There is bad precedent on government prayer, which is unconstitutional by any reasonable legal principle, test, or standard. But in 1983, the court simply ignored all of that and reverse engineered a politically palatable outcome. The government organized government led prayer in constitutional using bad facts and flawed history. I explored this in detail in The Founding Myth. Despite this bad precedent, Americans United brought a good challenge that both showed A, how faulty the 1983 decision was, and B, how it might succeed under the strange scheme the court fabricated. An important question under this backward scheme was who was the audience for the prayers? Were the prayers directed at the legislators themselves or at the public? One reason such prayers are supposedly constitutional is that legislators aren't abusing state power to impose religion on everyone, just each other. In this town, the prayer given used at the podium from which citizens spoke to the council. Normally, the podium faced the semicircular dais in which the city council sat so that citizens could easily address council members. It's a fairly typical setup, but in this town, as I noted in our brief citing numerous exhibits, when clergy came up to deliver the prayer, the city would turn the podium around to face the audience, not the members of the council. The city went out of its way to direct prayer at the citizens. This was irrefutably factual proof that these prayers were not meant for the council members personally, but were imposed on citizens attending the meeting to hear about property taxes or restaurant licenses or kids' schools. People had to endure a Christian prayer imposed by their local government simply to participate in the government. The court altered this irrefutable fact. Quote, the principal audience for these invocations is not indeed the public, but lawmakers themselves, who may find that a moment of prayer or quiet reflection sets the mind to a higher purpose and thereby ease the task of governing, wrote Justice Anthony Kennedy in a 5-4 decision. It may seem like a small thing, but the abnegation of reality by the highest court tasked with truth and justice is rather a big deal. The fact was inconvenient, so it was changed. I asked Ayesha Khan, the AU attorney who litigated this case up to the high courts about this. This was a complete distortion of the undisputed facts. It was unprincipled, results-driven decision-making by conservative activist judges. Pure activism, she said. The justices twisted the facts and reality to suit their political agenda. The fact was integral in the outcome in previously bungled cases, making the task of reverse engineering here more difficult. So reality was simply altered. And now for generations of law students, the laws that read this case, that is reality. You must unshackle your mind from the belief that the Supreme Court is an impartial arbiter of truth and justice. The crusade depends upon people believing this myth. McConnell, Trump, and Leo cheated and stole and packed the courts to put their collaborators in place, not because they would administer justice even-handedly, but because they wouldn't. One final note. You'll notice that I often use exclusive language when talking about religion in this book. I write churches, and Christianity, rather than house of worship or religion. Yes, because this crusade is about privileging Christians. Occasionally, minorities will be swept into decisions benefiting Christians, but this crusade is about Christian privilege. I won't help perpetuate the myth that this version of religious freedom is ecumenical. Interesting. Battle plans, targets, and call to arms. Christian legal supremacy. Let me never fall into the vulgar mistake of dreaming that I am persecuted whenever I am contradicted. Ralph Waldo Emerson. Dominique Ray was going to die, that was certain. Many believed he deserved death. Ray's crimes were horrible, the stuff of parents' nightmares. His appeals were virtually exhausted. Alabama law states that this prison chaplain, always a Christian, may be present at an execution. 2 weeks before his scheduled death, the warden met with Ray and explained the execution step by step, including the fact that the prison chaplain, a Christian, would be present in the execution chamber. It also allows the condemned to have his own spiritual advisor present. The two are on the same list, equal under the law, but Alabama forced the Christian chaplain on everyone, no matter their religion, and excluded other advisors from the room. Ray was a Muslim and wanted a fellow Muslim in the room. He didn't want a Christian chaplain in the room. Ray's lawyers asked the court to temporarily stay his execution long enough to sort this out, or a short delay in the name of religious freedom. The 11th Circuit Court of Appeals explained the central constitutional problem succinctly. The state has regularly placed a Christian cleric in the execution room to minister to the needs of Christian inmates, but has refused to provide the same benefit to a devout Muslim and all other non-Christians. The three-judge panel, 2 Clinton and 1 Obama appointee, then correctly held that Alabama's policy violated Ray's religious freedom. If Ray were a Christian, he would have profound benefit because he is a Muslim. He is denied that benefit. Clear, simple, and correct. The conservative bloc of the Supreme Court disagreed. In 2-paragraph opinion, the 5 justices said that Ray took too long to raise this religious freedom issue. Ray learned that the chaplain issue on Wednesday, and his lawyers filed a religious freedom lawsuit on Monday. Ray would die on schedule. Chief Justice John Roberts and Justices Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, Neil Gorsuch, and Brett Kavanaugh were in such a rush to see Ray executed that they ignored the religious freedom of a dying man. Ray was a black Muslim, not a white Christian, so unlike every Christian Alabama executes, Ray died without religious consolation. His imam was not in the room, nor was the Christian chaplain. A last-minute concession. Ray was pronounced dead about 2 hours after the justices issued their 2 paragraphs. 18 months later, Justice delivered a keynote speech on to Leonard Leo's Federalist Society and had the gall to lament the degradation of religious freedom. It pains me to say this, but in certain quarters, religious liberty is fast becoming a disfavored right. But for Alito, that feeling only seems to extend to Christians. And Alito and his conservative cohort disfavor religious freedom when non-Christians seek to exercise it. Judges are always skeptical of prisoners' religious freedom claims, but had Ray been a Christian criminal to be executed, had he not converted to Islam in prison, he'd have had his spiritual comfort. The court's failure to uphold religious freedom resulted in genuine inequality, trampling minority rights. Unbelievably, especially given Alito's later lip service, the court claimed that keeping to a schedule is more important than religious freedom. The High Court's conservative bloc read the First Amendment guarantee of religious freedom through the lens of Christian supremacy. Just 8 months before this religious freedom decision, the justices handed down the gay wedding cake case. The bakery that discriminated against a gay couple. The court claimed that the state was so hostile to the bakery that it had to throw out an entire civil rights case, giving the bakery a free pass for its bigotry. When Christian is facing off against the government under the Constitution's guarantee of free exercise, the government cannot impose regulations that are hostile to the religious beliefs of affected citizens. The free exercise clause bars even subtle departures from neutrality on matters of religion. But when a condemned minority tried to lean on that principle, it evaporated. It was suddenly so insubstantial that the conservative bloc could spare only 2 paragraphs, neither of which mention religious freedom, the First Amendment, or the Constitution. Ray took longer to die than will take you to read the opinion ignoring his religious freedom. This is Christian supremacy. And this isn't an isolated example. This court upheld the Muslim ban before that. The justices ignored. Literally did not examine the constitutional principle that our secular government cannot fund religion when it held that Missouri must give taxpayer funds to a church because refusing to do so was religious discrimination. The court did this same thing in Montana, forcing the state to tax citizens for the benefit of Christian parents and Christian schools. We saw it again when the court allowed the government to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars displaying and maintaining a 40-foot concrete Christian cross on government property. And it almost happened again a month after Ray's execution, but the backlash against Ray's execution had been furious, swift, and international. The outcry was enough to change the outcome in a nearly identical Texas case. Texas was set to execute Patrick Murphy, who had converted to Buddhism a decade earlier. Texas gave Murphy a choice. He could either have a Christian prison chaplain or no chaplain, die with the state's preferred God, or die alone. Murphy challenged this, claiming religious freedom, and his challenge received more attention because of Ray's loss. Murphy lost in the lower courts, which cited Ray's case, but this time the Supreme Court stayed the execution over Thomas Alito and Gorsuch dissent. Kavanaugh wrote an opinion that backtracked on Ray's case. Too late for Ray. But Kavanaugh also suggested that the state could allow religious advisors only in the viewing room, not the death chamber. So Texas banned prison chaplains and religious advisors from the execution chamber. Alabama did too. These new bans were challenged. In February 2021, the court blocked Alabama's execution of Willie Smith, a Christian, because the state would not let his pastor in the execution chambers to provide consolation. That September, the court stayed Texas from executing John Ramirez, a Baptist who not only claimed a religious freedom right to have his pastor in the room, but also for that the pastor to lay hands on him and pray out loud as the state kills him. It blocked the rule in Ramirez's case in March. Christians are still favored. The Muslim lost and was killed with 2 paragraphs. But Christians thumping their Christianity received full briefing and oral arguments for their religious freedom. The Crusaders also came to their defense. Christians are litigating more religious freedom cases under this court and winning more than ever. That's not because this Supreme Court is vindicating religious freedom, but because it is dividing our nation along religious lines. It is on the path to make Christians a favored, privileged class and non-Christians second-class citizens. Chapter 2, The Court and the Crusade. I'm loving this. How are you? You loving it too? Hope you are. Don't forget to join the orange heart. Click on the orange heart and become a skeptic for the cost of a single TikTok coin. You'll be glad you did. Nothing so dramatic as the above quote marks the opening of the Crusaders' hostility on our Constitution. Give me a second. But the Roberts Court issued a clear call to arms in 2010. The Crusaders set up cases and the Supreme Court knocks them down. Together, they're weaponizing religious freedom as a constitutional right. The story begins a decade earlier. John Roberts was appointed Chief Justice in 2005 by George W. Bush, who himself was appointed president by the Supreme Court in the 2000 decision, Bush v. Gore. The impact of that decision is incalculable. The various what-if scenarios are confusing, contradictory, and complicated by the legal remedies the parties sought and the courts imposed. A full review and accounting of the 175,000 disputed Florida votes showed that more Floridians voted for Gore than Bush. I was a freshman at Tulane University and didn't grasp all the implications of the decision, but conservative politicians did. Chief Justice Rehnquist, Justice Antonin Scalia, and Justice Thomas readily abandoned their long professed judicial and constitutional views to decide in favor of Bush. It was naked partisanship, and it broke the court. His colleagues' actions were so crudely partisan that Souder thought he might not be able to serve with him anymore, wrote one court observer of Justice David Souder. There were times when David Souder thought of Bush v. Gore and wept. Shedding the skin of impartiality and nonpartisanship to claim a presidency is a bell that cannot be unrung. Certainly, it made clear no politicians who can read demographic trends that judges would be more important than ever in the future. Capturing judgeships would help maintain political power and even minority rule of a party shrinking demographically. There's a good argument to be made that packing and capturing the judiciary began earlier. Others date it to the replacement of Thurgood Marshall with Clarence Thomas, an unqualified Republican operative credibly accused of sexual harassment, an accusation he denied. Bush v. Gore didn't just crystallize conservative thinking on capturing the judiciary. It helped them accomplish the goal. It's far easier to win a second presidential term than a first. Had Gore been president, who knows what might have happened in the 2004 election and who would have been president in 2005 when Chief Justice William Rehnquist died. But W was a W-appointed John Roberts. This marked the first time the court had four Catholics, Roberts, Scalia, Kennedy, and Thomas. W nominated the fifth, Sam Alito, a month after Roberts was confirmed. Before Roberts' decision involving religion and the Constitution were haphazard and reliably favored neither side. The court's twin decision involving Ten Commandments displays exemplify this. The decision came down on the same day in June 2005, just months before Roberts was nominated. Both decisions were 5-4. The Ten Commandments monument at the Capitol in Austin, Texas, was constitutional and allowed to remain. The Ten Commandments displays in two Kentucky courthouses were unconstitutional and had to be removed. Justice Stephen Breyer was incapable of consistency when deciding whether "I am the Lord your God, you shall have no other gods before me" was a religious declaration or not. His indecisiveness and unwillingness to cause political offense made him the swing vote. The brace of cases illustrates a judicial failing, but also a judiciary that was set up for grabs on those issues. Before those June 2005 cases, the court had handed out wins and losses to everyone. In 2004, it held that religious freedom did not require the government to fund scholarships for students training to be pastors. In 2000, it struck down organized prayer over loudspeakers in public high school football games. These were the last clear wins for state-church separation. But the court wasn't always educating pure legal principles, and especially in the 5 or so years before Roberts' appointment. That led to serious inconsistencies, as with the Ten Commandments monuments. Also in 2000, it allowed loans of taxpayer funds and government resources to flow on private religious schools in a confused split decision. It allowed Ohio to use taxpayer money to pay for private religious education in 2002. The first time the court allowed vouchers, and a devastating blow to public education 5-4. The decisions upholding the wall of separation had stronger majorities, and the rationales for ignoring the wall were weak, confused, contradictory, and typically unable to win a majority of the justices, but not for long. The 3 months after the twin Ten Commandments cases, John Roberts was the new Chief Justice. Everything changed. Roberts advocated for deeply conservative change, but slowly. The incrementalism had been a hallmark of his career, so after a slow transition and a post-Ten Commandments cases breather, in 2010, the Roberts Court started deciding a case involving the First Amendment religious clauses nearly every year. The Roberts Court has been demolishing the wall of separation between church and state one brick at a time ever since. As it is doing this, it's also altering the definition of religious freedom and turning it against state-church separation. The Roberts Court has betrayed a founding American principle, often in the name of religious freedom. As author, Pulitzer Prize winner, New York Times journalist, and Yale law professor Linda Greenhouse put it, A core project of today's Supreme Court under the leadership of Chief Justice John Roberts is to reorient the First Amendment's two religious clauses. The Roberts Court's 2010 call to arms was clear. The courts approved a farcical fix of a monumental violation of the constitutional separation between government and religion. An 8-foot-tall Christian cross stood in the middle of more than 1.5 million acres of public land, the Mohave National Preserve. A retired National Park Service employee challenged the cross in court. Crusaders intervened, First Liberty Institute, then known as Liberty Law Institute. This cross was the prominent symbol of Christianity in the middle of the government land, marking, like a conquistador's flag, land that belongs to we the people for we the Christians. It was unconstitutional by any measure. Complying with the Constitution by removing it was seen as a threat to Christians, symbolic of their loss of dominant status. To ensure the cross stayed up, Congress transferred out of sea of 1.5 million acres, the 1 acre of land under the cross, to a private entity that would maintain the cross or lose the land. If the cross came down, the land reverted to the United States. This wasn't a solution to the constitutional violation, but a way to perpetuate the violation. That sham of a remedy was challenged because, like the cross, the land transfer itself had a religious purpose: to display the symbol of the Christian religion. In a 5-4 decision, the Roberts Court approved the sham. This mockery signaled a willingness to accept the flimsiest of legal fictions over constitutional principles. More ominously, the Supreme Court agreed to accept the fiction because it would be employed against constitutional principles if the result privileged Christians. The message was unmistakable: Christianity first, the Constitution second, if at all. The Crusaders heard the message and the floodgates opened. They filed lawsuit after lawsuit, stoked fear of status loss, and raised millions. In 2011, the court allowed a voucher program to send taxpayers' funds to religious schools by denying religious ability to challenge the program in a 5-4 decision. In 2012, it said that religious organizations can legally discriminate when hiring clergy, weaponizing that against employees with no religious entities or duties. In 2014, it said that religious freedom can override the rights of other citizens, and upheld the Christians' only prayer, the town of Greece, New York, imposed on citizens. In 2017, the court forced taxpayers to fund a Lutheran children's ministry and church. In 2018, it rediscovered a potent argument, hostility toward religion, and used it to let a business owner violate states' civil laws and discriminate against protected classes of people. That same year, after bemoaning hostility toward Christians in that case, it upheld Donald Trump's Muslim ban. In 2019, it abandoned the need for a sham remedy and simply decided a massive Christian cross on government property didn't violate the constitutional separation between state and church. In 2020, it continued to abandon the pretense and said that taxpayers must fund religious schools 5-4, another betrayal of founding American principles. Later that year and into the next, it also began striking down public health measures in the name of religious freedom. In 2021, the court, using a phalanx of legalism and jargon, unanimously held that the Catholic Church can discriminate against a minority in the name of God while performing public functions, in a case similar to the gay wedding cake case. This run of religious cases is remarkable, and it is deliberate. Unlike other courts which handle anything that gets filed, the Supreme Court chooses which cases to take. It typically rejects more than 97% of the cases that come its way. The simple fact is that this Supreme Court wants to decide these cases. If this seems impossible or unlikely or conspiratorial, know that conservatives have already succeeded in previous crusades. This is precisely what they did for the Second Amendment. In 1977, absolutists took over the National Rifle Association and converted an organization that advocated for firearms safety education and recreational shooting into a powerhouse focused exclusively on rewriting the Second Amendment into a personal, individual right to own a gun. The NRA's new leadership was dramatic, dogmatic, and overtly ideological. For the first time, the organization formally embraced the idea that the sacred Second Amendment was at the heart of its concerns, explained Michael Waldman, a law professor who wrote a biography of the Second Amendment. They sought to put their right to bear arms at the top of the hierarchy of rights over the rights of the children at Sandy Hook and Robb elementary schools to live. They pumped millions into the fight, funding legal scholarship, lobbying, litigation, and public relations campaign. And they succeeded in 2008 when the Supreme Court finally held that the Second Amendment created an individual right to own a gun unconnected with the militia service. They changed the culture and what the Constitution meant. But as Chief Justice Warren Burger once said, the Second Amendment has been the subject of one of the greatest pieces of fraud, I repeat the word fraud, on the American public by special interest groups that I have ever seen in my lifetime. The Crusade seeks to do the same with the First Amendment protection of religious freedom, except that it's happening much faster. I began defending the wall of separation between the state and church in 2011, just as Roberts Court began destroying it in earnest. In another decade, it will be unrecognizable. This book will be a snapshot of the disaster and a frame frozen in time. Without massive institutional change, gravity and momentum will further destroy this founding American principle. But the primary weapon being used to dismantle that wall between the state and church is weaponized religious freedom. There are hundreds of cases at any given time being litigated in the courts, far too many to cover in a book. These are pushed by a phalanx of overfunded, Koch-backed crusade groups that have focused their energy on this singular issue because of its potential to change everything. Again, Linda Greenhouse gets it right. There are plenty of cases making claims that would have been dismissed out of hand not too many years ago and now have to be taken seriously by those of us worried about the growing threat that our increasingly weaponized free exercise clause poses to civil society. The Supreme Court didn't just call for the crusade, it joined it. It ought to be obvious by now, but still it must be plainly stated. The Supreme Court has been politicized. It openly crossed that Rubicon in Bush v. Gore. It has been packed asymmetrically as the Democrats ceded this ground to the extreme Christian wing of the Republican Party. The new guiding principles of this new Supreme Court is not the Constitution or law, but simply this: Christianity wins. Sure, other religions will sometimes win, but if you're waging an outcome of the case, ignoring the law, and bet on conservative Christianity, the Supreme Court is not the institution you learned about in high school. A court of justice that protects the powerless, a court that honors the words etched in stone on the facade of its own building: equal justice under the law. That myth is the true facade, and it brought us to this disastrous juncture. The Supreme Court is a deeply conservative, retrogressive institution and has been for nearly all of its history. The bright spots, such as the Warren Court, were fleeting and led to the political backlash and retreating court. This is the court of Plessy versus Ferguson, of Dred Scott, and of fugitive slave laws, of trying to suffocate the New Deal in the cradle, of gutting the powers of the 14th Amendment, won with the blood of so many Americans during the Civil War, of the Japanese internment camps, of Muslim bans, of billionaires and corporations and political gerrymandering and gutting voting rights. The story of the Supreme Court is Bush v. Gore. It is a politicized body and packed with political activists. 3 of the current justices worked for Bush on the Bush v. Gore litigation: Kavanaugh, Roberts, and Barrett. Helping assemble Bush's team of lawyers was Christian nationalism and deep conservative Texas Senator Ted Cruz. I called John and asked him to help. Within hours, he was on the plane to Florida. Roberts worked in the Reagan White House. So did Clarence Thomas. Scalia worked for Nixon and Ford. So did Rehnquist, and before that, as an advisory to Barry Goldwater's campaign. Kavanaugh worked in the Bush White House, married a Bush aide, and was on Ken Starr's team pursuing President Bill Clinton for crimes that seemed tame after Trump's tenure. Kavanaugh even drafted parts of the final Starr report. Even Kavanaugh was, credibly accused of sexual assault during his Supreme Court confirmation. He screamed at senators while undisguised loathing and uncontrolled anger. He promised partisan retribution on his political enemies, speaking of reaping the whirlwind, suffering, consequences, saying that what goes around comes around. The justices didn't just call for the crusade, they actively participated in it. Leonard Leo, the power broker of the Federalist Society, selected them and supported or even forced their nominations through because their ideology lined with the crusade. Leo's job had been described as being the monitor of the various nominees' ideological purity. Roberts and Alito were both nominated in 2005, both members of Leo's Federalist Society, and Leo played a crucial role in their partisan nomination. Clarence Thomas, a longtime friend of Leo's, is a member of the group too. All told, Leo is responsible for the confirmation of Roberts, Alito, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett. These 6 votes on the Supreme Court, and Leo chose 5 for their ideology, a crusader ideology. John Roberts authored briefs in the first Bush's Department of Justice alongside Ken Starr, arguing that public schools can impose religion on children at graduation ceremonies and that Christian Bible clubs can use public schools to organize. He argued unsuccessfully for an entire rewrite of state church separation jurisprudence, but he's done that on the bench. He litigated those cases along Crusaders, including the American Center for Law and Justice, which would go to bat for Roberts during his nomination, especially when it came to issues of religion and the law. In private practice, Roberts represented Connolly School of the Holy Child, a Catholic school that wanted to construct a 30,000 square foot building in a residential neighborhood without going through the zoning process. Roberts wrote that when states exempt religion from secular requirements, it is invariably constitutional. This argument has been implemented in several decisions we'll look at in this book, perhaps culminating in the 2021 Philadelphia foster care case, an opinion that Roberts himself wrote. As the New York Times explained, he always advocated and the most conservative course in the Reagan White House, taking positions even more conservative than his prominent superiors, criticized court decisions that required a thick wall between church and state, and defended self-imposed prayer and supporting transferal government resources to parochial schools. All of these stances became part of the crusade. Roberts' Reagan White House memos are revealing. In one, he agreed that decisions like the 1980 Supreme Court decision striking down a Kentucky law requiring a Ten Commandments display in every public school classroom betrays a hostility to religion not demanded by the Constitution. Labeling state church separation as hostility toward religion instead of a basic constitutional guarantee that protects religious freedom is a hallmark of the crusade and something Roberts incorporated into decisions furthering the crusade, such as Montana decision discussion in Chapter 14. Roberts himself appeared hostile to the ACLU on issues of law and religion and supported the constitutional amendment that would allow public schools to impose Christian prayer on school children. He also lamented a 1985 Supreme Court decision that correctly struck down Alabama schools' minute of mandatory silence for meditation or voluntary prayer. Roberts wrote, "We still have an uphill battle to return prayer to schools. We battle, return prayer to schools." This is the language of a crusader. Samuel Alito. Alito was nominated a month after Roberts was confirmed. Alito pledged his fidelity to crusader ideology early in his career. Asking for a promotion at the Reagan Department of Justice, he explained that his deep interest in constitutional law was motivated in large part by disagreement with Warren Court's decision, particularly upholding the separation of state and church. He began, "I am and have always been a conservative," and ended with, "I am a lifelong registered Republican, a member of the Federalist Society." As his appellate judge records show, he put his ideology into practice. After his Supreme Court nomination, Alito fearlessly told senators he believed the court might have gone too far in separating church and state. and reportedly told Senator John Cornyn that the court's decision gave the impression of hostility to religious speech and religious expression. Again, framing the constitutional line drawn between state and church as hostility is a key argument for the attempt to weaponize religious freedom. Alito revived this hostility argument for the Crusade, and it has proven crucial in many cases, as we'll see. Alito spoke to a group of fellow Catholic lawyers advocating, Advocati Christi. In 2017, he said, "It is up to all of us to evangelize our fellow Americans about the issue of religious freedom." Antonio Scalia. Before Neil Gorsuch, there was Antonio Scalia. Scalia and Leo were longtime friends. Joan Biskupic writes that traditional Catholicism was integral to Scalia's identity and quotes Leo on the fervent faith they shared. It's pretty clear to me that Scalia believes the Catholic Church is the one true church. Scalia believed in a literal devil and a dead constitution. Dead, dead, dead. He was the kind of judge Leo wanted. When Scalia died, nearly a year left in Barack Obama's administration, the Republicans refused to even consider any replacement, a gross departure that politicized the court and effectively changed its size. Leo raised millions of anonymous dollars opposing Obama's nomination. Before he and Trump finally replaced Scalia, 14 months after his death with Neil Gorsuch, before he was judge, Gorsuch penned an opinion piece for the National Review attacking American progressives and liberals and their overweening addiction to constitutional lawsuits to affect their social agenda on everything from gay marriage to the use of vouchers for private school education. The article doesn't mention the lawsuits conservatives coordinated to, for instance, redefine the Second Amendment. Gorsuch's crusading tendencies were a bit less obvious until he was on the bench, but Leo presumably knew he was just picking. Before joining the High Court, Gorsuch dissented in a case involving government displays of a 12-foot memorial cross stamped with state insignia along highways and argued that it was a biased presumption to say that state Christian crosses amount to state endorsing Christianity. This was just 7 months after the 2010 Day Vault. He also dissented in a case striking down a Ten Commandments monument at a county courthouse because the Ten Commandments, which began, "I am the Lord thy God, you shall have no other gods before me," might actually convey a secular moral message, and their influence in American law is undeniable. The founding myth disposes of this claim. He also helped Hobby Lobby's anti-contraceptive case while on the bench. Brett Kavanaugh. Kavanaugh's crusading bona fides were clearer, plus he and Leo were longtime personal friends. Kavanaugh's fellow appellate judges describe him as affable but unyielding, a man who would rarely, if ever, change his mind, and a great colleague except in the cases where it mattered. In other words, he was an ideological hardliner. As a lawyer, Kavanaugh fought to uphold a Florida program that sent taxpayer money to private religious schools. Kavanaugh co-authored the Supreme Court brief for the New Jersey affiliate of James Dobson's Focus on the Family, which argued that students should be able to use loudspeakers at a public school football game to broadcast prayers. In it, Kavanaugh attacked people who supported the First Amendment and state-church separation as absolutists, hostile to religion in any form, advocating for an Orwellian world and seeking the full extermination of private religious speech from public schools, and to cleanse public schools throughout the country of private religious speech. Kavanaugh argued that if the justices decided the case in favor of the people suing Catholic and Mormon students and their families, Christians would be relegated to bottom-of-the-barrel status in our society, below socialists and Nazis and Klan members and panhandlers and ideological and political advocacy groups of all stripes. This is the Crusader mentality. Christians must be privileged and allowed to impose their religion on everyone using government power and resources. Anything less is discrimination and inequality. Crusaders, American Center for Law and Justice, orchestrated the school prayers defense alongside Texas Attorney General John Cornyn. As a senator 2 decades later, Cornyn shepherded Kavanaugh's crippled nomination through to a confirmation after he was credibly accused of sexual assault. Kavanaugh and Cornyn lost when the court struck down the prayer in a 2000 decision, possibly the last unequivocal victory for state church separation at the United States Supreme Court. Thomas and Barrett we'll hear more about later. This says nothing about the dozens, perhaps hundreds, of lesser federal judges chosen and placed by the same network for their ideological fidelity. Something like 1/3 of George W. Bush's nominees were members of Leo's group. It's one thing for a liberal lawyer to rant about the court, but data doesn't lie. In the religious freedom context, our courts are politically captured. Stanford Constitutional Law Center fellow and new NYU law adjunct professor Salman Rothschild looked at challenges to pandemic-related public health measures that restricted religious gatherings. The results are shocking. As we'll see later, these cases were easy and all should have come down in favor of public health. The right to worship does not include the right to infect others or risk their lives. Rothschild found that every judge, 100% appointed by the Democratic president, sided with public health orders and against the religious challengers seeking a right to risk other people's lives. That's the right call and consistent with over a century of Supreme Court precedent. But only 1/3, 34% of judges appointed by Republican presidents sided with public health measures. Even more striking, only 18% of Trump judges voted to uphold measures. Tellingly, other legal challenges to public health orders included challenges based on other First Amendment rights like free speech and free assembly, and uniformly rejected by judges across the political spectrum, again, showing that the correct decision was to let those public health orders stand. That's the hierarchy laid bare. Religious freedom above other constitutional rights. We've seen a cataclysmic change, Rothschild writes. The politicization of religious freedom has infiltrated every level of the federal judiciary. In the past, a partisanship existed in some areas of law, but not really for religious freedom cases. After the court's 2010 day vote, that began to shift. From the mid-2010s through when the pandemic hit, explains Rothschild, the unprecedented number of constitutional free exercise cases brought in such a condensed span of time forced that partisanship into a sharp relief. That's the Crusade. 2 studies of religious cases from 1947 through mid-2020 revealed a similar trend. Political ideology affected the outcome, but the religion of judges themselves also played a significant role. Before the Reagan era, Catholic and Protestant justices were more likely than Jewish justices to favor religion when deciding cases. But beginning in the early 1980s, Catholic justices began favoring religious parties more, about 12 times more than Protestant justices. The court is now majority Catholic. The latest numbers show that Christians are more likely to win with this court than ever before. Before the courts were packed, the court ruled in favor of religion about half the time. But that massively shifted under Roberts, from that baseline about half. In the Roberts court, the win rate jumps to 81%. It is not a pro-religion or pro-Christian shift. In the Warren court, no plaintiff was affiliated with a mainstream Christian religion. Thus, all of the pro-religion outcomes benefited minority or dissenting religious groups. Religious freedom was once a shield to protect minorities. But by the time we reach the Roberts court, 8 mainstream Christian plaintiffs win 6 of their cases. The researchers also examined whether a given ruling favored not just Christian parties, but mainstream Christian organizations, practices, or values. In the early cases of the Warren court, the mainstream Christianity was favored in 44% of cases under Roberts. It nearly doubled up to 85%. The researchers suggest that one way to think about this pattern is that Roberts Court extended the Warren Court's protections for minority religions so as to encompass majority religion as well. But this book will show that this trend showcases privilege, not equality. And we'll leave it there. Yes, wrong direction, definitely. Let's go back and read some of the comments. Reject modernity, embrace tradition. Oh God. Yeah, that's a Catholic troll. Former Dem, former pagan, happy to see America going in the right direction again. Yeah, to religious extremism. Yeah, gotta love it. Let's see. Yeah, we're going back to witch burning. That's great. Why are these guys talking about Jesus always so creepy? Yes, they're always creepy. And you know what? Justice Brett Kavanaugh and Clarence Thomas. Oh yeah, Alito, creepy as hell. But if that's the direction you want to go, yuck. Ah, and it won't let me scroll past that. Okay. But anyway, yeah, that's what I have. I've read the introduction and the 2 chapters, so I'm not sure when I'll get to this book again. Hopefully, maybe Monday. We'll see. We'll see how much energy I have. But with that, I want to thank you so much for staying with me, and I'm going to keep reading. I'm not going to quit. All right. With that, I'll say good day. Pressure. Feeling pressure. Feeling pressure. Feeling pressure.